struggling with not having Wi-Fi at the start, so apologies for that, but we're recording now. And thank you to Gunnar, who's taking great notes over there. So glad we have that backup.
If anybody had a cell phone to record that, that'd be great. You can just email it to us.
I doubt that was happening, unfortunately. That's okay. Well, thank you all again. I think the fact that we can have this conversation as a group and we'll continue to have this conversation and hold these tensions as a group is really important. Thinking about process moving forward, how do we make sure we're hearing from voices and communities that need to be involved in this decision-making process, I think is really critical. And thank you all again for your participation in that and thinking through that. We are going to transition to, I think we have public comment and then a short break, but as we wrap up this conversation and move into talking about what draft actions could look like and how we might organize them, and then in January, really digging into draft action content, being able to hold this conversation that we just had and thinking about what are the important pieces of what we've just reflected on that we want to carry forward into that work will continue to be kind of the task at hand. So that's what I will kind of leave everyone with as we close out this section of the meeting, is just kind of continue to hold on to those pieces that we want to make sure we don't lose as we're drafting plan content and as we're going out into communities and sharing that content. And I just, thank you all for having that conversation and holding that as a group together. Thanks. Trey, you're up.
All right. Well, we're going to invite guests now to reflect on anything they've heard, or if you have prepared public comments, we can hear those now. We have about 10 or so minutes for this. Let's see, couple of notes. Well, one last thing I want to say, and by the way, to Nick's point, everybody gets as many comments as they want and we have time for. So you definitely get to raise your hand more than once. I'll try not to. But I did want to say that to Nick's point, that we don't want to do conservation to people ever. Conservation is supposed to be about a mutual relationship between landowners and conservation organizations. It's not eminent domain. It's not we're not trying to take. We're trying to work with communities to create understanding and authorizing environment to participate in a system. We want to make that system as facile and inclusive as possible so that even those who haven't felt able to participate can. Public comments. Before we open that up, we have been receiving public comments, written comments, and wanted to note that those have been posted to the project portal website in just as we've received them. We want to make sure that that there's a place where people's unfiltered, unedited comments that they submit to us are available to anybody who's checking out the project website and the project. So those are going to we'll add to those as we go along. There's going to be plenty of periods where we're asking for public comments, and we're always open to a comment at any time from anybody about anything related to this plan. So feel free to send those. We are also working on, because we had that first round of listening sessions and a bunch of data and comments there, and we had a whole lot of comments and process in the inventory. So we are working on a summary of that too, that sort of disaggregates and teases out themes and questions. So that will also be posted in the new year, and we'll send that to TAC so you can see some analysis of what we've received as well. But just know, members of the public, I'm going to open it up now, and also at any point, if you send us something, it will be included in the project record. So with that, we have we'll take until about 10:35 if there are comments now. Or hearing none.
Want to make sure.
Oh, Zach, go ahead. Do you want to come to the table so that it gets picked up by the microphone, Zach? And if anybody else, if you do want to come up and say something, please come on up.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Porter. I'm the executive director of Standing Trees. I live just up the North Branch here in Montpelier, and I'm grateful for the chance to make a public comment this morning. It's really hard to sit on the outside of a circle when you're hearing people talk about striving for inclusivity and equity, when no opportunity was provided to be a part of this conversation. Not even the chance to apply to be a part of this conversation. I just want to say that because I hope you've read the comments that we submitted, but they were long, and I don't expect that you would have read 20 pages. And you know, it's tough. This bill is very imperfect, but it strives to change the status quo. And one of the opportunities that this group has that I'm worried that we're going to miss the chance to take action on is to really dig into, and the fact that there isn't a diverse, real, I would say, robust diversity of voices sitting in the circle here. One of the things that I'm afraid is going to get missed out on is the opportunity to change the way that we do things today and that we have been doing things for a long time. That's the opportunity that this visioning exercise provides to us. And I've been hearing in these conversations very high level dialogue. I'm still waiting a year and a half into this process to figure out where does the rubber meet the road on changing the status quo? What's going to change? And how do we have an in-depth conversation about the science, about the policies that exist today that reflect systemic bias in the way that we practice conservation in this state? I could go into specifics. I do hope to present some of those later on. Perhaps it's hard to tell whether it's better to say some of those things now or after this upcoming conversation. But there's been a lot of just high level in the clouds conversation, perhaps important, but the clock is ticking, and it feels to me like we are potentially missing the chance to actually take advantage of being together, shaping conservation for the future in Vermont in a way that's different from the way that it's been done in the past, so that it's not just a rubber stamp of kind of the way that we've always done things. So I'm hoping that, we'll dig into what are those specifics, and can this conservation plan make recommendations that will change the way things are done today? Not because there aren't great things going on right now. Absolutely there are. But there are also really important ways that we can change. And this exercise needs to point those out. So thanks for the chance to offer a comment.
Thank you. Anyone else? Much appreciated, Zach.
Anyone on Zoom from the public who wants to give comment? Raise your hand or come off mute. Still not seeing you.
We have another time later in the meeting for more public comments. So why don't we take a break now until 10:35, or what do we have till 10:35, and then we're gonna start to look at detail. We're gonna dive in the next phase and start to look at how will an expanded plan framework look and operate. So you've seen objectives, broad, pathways a little narrower. Today, we're going to look at how we can draft actions under those pathways, and we're going to look at a specific example of one. And then when we come back in January, we'll have that whole expanded framework available for discussion. So there'll be we hope a couple weeks to look at that, and then a couple of weeks after the meeting for people to reflect and send us more, so that as we go into regional listening sessions and other outreach in February and March, the TAC will have helped us to really shape the questions that go out there with that expanded work product. But for now, let's stretch, grab coffee, grab soda, use the loo, and Rich, you can have a comment on the way out.
Yes, one comment on the way out.
Yeah.
Comes to mind after what Zach was saying about this is an opportunity that should not be lost or squandered, and keeping tension, holding it all the time. Trey used a word earlier, not to single Trey out, but just a word, as we go through this process, we have what are characterized as outcomes. And I want to remind us that outcomes are inputs. That's the future coming at us. It's a circle. So got to keep it wide open.
That's a nice thought to have in mind as we stretch for a second and come back. Thank you, Rich. Yeah, it's the circularity of this shouldn't be lost on anybody.
Right.
All right,
5-minute break.
official,
Oh,
300 seconds. That sounds like more or less.
Sort of.
no, that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Hiding.
Yeah.
Like taking. What I own was the guy. I only thought it was a dandy. And then spent a long time. I never think but I had a great once.
If you want to,
She's just done a lot of it.
Which is
Wow.
just you want to say something like leading mathematic news.
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
You're right.
No,
There's your thing again.
Thanks. Kids a lot. It's one of my most fun. The last few doing a shot must start off early and kind of like had fairly short.
Yeah, I know. It's like a tangent where it's like, yeah,
I'm not
most people have
Patty
like,
B,
you're
well,
there
like
because you
I'm
like
not
to be
doing-
out there, right, right.
Right.
see each other.
This was like, needs to be overcorrecting in the other direction.
Right,
Walked
right.
like 220 miles.
Wow.
It was a great time.
Yeah.
Got to hunt with my kid on my back a lot.
Yeah.
I have a 5.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's got to get in front of some deer with the 2-year-old. Kind of blew his little mind.
Yeah, I bet it did, I bet it did.
Almost got convinced that I was
Yeah.
a biker when I was like, fell through a bunch of beach with my son on my back. Like,
Yeah. Oh, God, oh, God.
well, maybe see something I don't. No, yeah, had a really good time. Covered a lot of country. Brought a lot of people who had good.
Yeah,
I'm trying to like, like my main gig is a tile setter. That's like my day to day. I got into guiding so I'd be able to like justify being in the
Taking
woods
that
more.
time.
during the
Yeah,
winter
that's
than
awesome.
during the
That's
fall.
great.
And I kind of have had a mixed relationship with it. Because I hunt, like, I tend to hunt like big mountainous wooded areas with not tons of deer, like either back in the Adirondacks or up in the greens, and it's just really hard to guide people in that sort of
Yeah,
setting. Like I can't.
right,
Like,
yeah.
but I've sort of
Here aligned with.
I'm like very clear that I'm trying to teach you how to track deer. Or, like,
Right,
still
right,
hunt big
right.
ones.
Yeah, yeah.
And we talk somewhere like at the expense of seeing.
Mhm,
It's really more of a lesson. I've had a lot more.
That is, it's a good frame too. It's like, yeah,
I can't like.
you're not taking them to a game for, you know,
Yeah, right.
a
I'm
game
like,
farm
come
where
with
it's
me
like,
so you
yeah,
can shoot a big buck.
right,
It's not really.
it'll help
Maybe
create the
some people can-
conditions that you will eventually.
Right,
shoot
right.
a big buck.
Like the idea is you don't come back.
Right,
It's not a
right.
good business.
No,
But it's-
Unless by
But it's fun.
referral, like, you know.
Yeah,
it's
right,
like,
right.
yeah.
And if,
I mean-
people have fun with it and it's made by taking some of the dialing for a couple. So that's kind
Yeah,
of, it is also, I'm terrible at, and I haven't improved at all in this, at like estimating people's ability and interest in hiking long distances. So we keep getting in this position where we're like 6 miles from the truck and they're like, where's that?
well,
You guys are a long ways out lately. It was a good one. Yeah, it went a little long. No, I spent a lot of time in the so I hunted up in my family. So I'm from Long Lake, which is like the geographic center of the Adirondacks, and my brothers are all from St. Regis Falls. It's kind of like north, right on the edge of the northwestern part of the park. So we all get up there for the week of Thanksgiving together. I had my kids with me for that, which was my 5-year-old was like on my back during that whole trip. So that was a blast. And then we hunted the Adirondacks down around the Long Lake. And then
That's also.
most of the first week of rifle season, coming up kind of near Lincoln, I'm in Bristol, so we're like our nearest like big mountain hunting. Yeah, I let it go a little long. I ended up shooting deer in muzzle loader. The clock was starting.
yeah,
My
yeah.
wife was like, so
Yeah.
like the idea here.
Freezer is hard.
Yes, the freezer is full, yeah, but it was a little more arduous than in years past.
Very good.
My husband was out all of rifle season and it was like day before the end of the month, and he got 2 in one day.
Guys,
I was like, all right, I'm done.
it is kind of how that, it's like that late festival period, if you're in the deer, you are in. Because they really start to pump up, go together and stuff, and it is like, it's so nerve wracking to not a tag, like the same 12, but it's a heck of a time to be in the woods too. Yeah, conditions were like this is snow wise the best. I mean, not only did we have snow, but it never was we had like 1 3-day period of.
Yeah, it's so true, because it just didn't thaw, like, we
Right.
just didn't have thaw.
I have the mountain that I hunt stuff around, like, it literally never, it was just snow, like, not like head silent, but kind of, it doesn't travel very far, it also like soaks up powder. It's from opening day and. Fantastic.
I'm over in the afternoon.
That teapot's not going on. I'm glad you're starting your Christmas today.
Yeah.
Get started again in about 2 seconds here.
Okay, complain about that. Ironically, I missed that, but the only day I was on Crunch Cell. But sometimes like they're walking, they're crunching so much.
Right,
they
they don't got here, yeah.
Deafening for everybody.
All right. Gang.
Should be back. Okay, Joe. Bye.
You?
Great to tell you.
So as we get started again, what I wanted we're gonna take the next hour, like I said, to look at a template for how we're gonna build actions out under the objectives and pathways, and an example action that comes from objective 1. It's focused on how conservation can increase climate resilience outcomes. So how do we do permanent conservation that then leads to those things? So Annie's gonna hand out some stuff in just a second. We've got those 2 handouts, and we've got the objectives and pathways, a few copies of that like we had last time. So just we flipped that out of the framework report. Those are changing and evolving as we go, obviously, and we've heard a lot of feedback on them. So, but from the fixed point in time at which we uploaded that, we've got those objectives and pathways ready. And then we've got that fact sheet that I handed out last time that's been sent around. It's just some reminders of like what the bill says and all that jazz. So as we do our work this morning, I wanted to make sure you have some references. But the goals of this next hour are to make sure that we have a shared understanding of the process for actions development and the timeline. We want to hear your thoughts on this template because we're trying to put together a whole expanded framework. So today, and if you have thoughts in the next few days that you need to share in writing, like, does this template work? Is it messy? Does it create measurability, or does it create vagary? You know, like, is this going to work to do this in line with the goals? And then what we're going to invite you to think about at your convenience and on your schedule between now and January 22, when we come back together, is what other actions built out under that template do you want to make sure that we see in that expanded framework? So we've got objectives, we've got pathways. Some people have already started thinking about this. Some people have done a lot of work on it. Some people might just be starting. You might want to interact with me and Annie and Isaac about this if you have questions between now and then, but we really want to hear from you in January, like both a reaction to what we've put together, but also bringing your own fresh ideas to that January 22nd conversation. So does that make sense as goals for this next hour? As you saw for the rest of the morning, we'll do an update on engagement and timeline. We have some lunch, and Gus is going to join us. We just want to have a kind of an open conversation at lunchtime too. So that's where we're going from here today. So Annie is going to hand some stuff out. As she does that, we're going to have another, I'm going to take maybe 10 minutes to walk through what we've prepared for you today. Then we're going to take 10 minutes to do some reflection and thinking. And then we'll have about 40 minutes for kind of conversation and outro, what comes next. So I'm going to wait till she gets around the room because I think it'll be easier.
Starting with just the template.
Yeah, the template is what I'm going to talk about here in a second. So architecture, again, 3 broad objectives. Each objective has several pathways under it. Each pathway might have 3 to 5 actions with associated sub-actions underneath it. That's how we're trying to scaffold and kind of accordion flex this plan. So there's like, conservation in communities, conservation for ecology, conservation capacity, innovations, and funding. 3 broad objectives, and then numbers of pathways under those. So the one we're going to look at is under objective 1. But first, looking at this template, what we wanted to show, first of all, is like at the pathway level, as we build this out, how does each pathway in the plan contribute to the vision and goals of this act, right? So tying it back, and you can see those on the Act 59 fact sheet, that there's a vision statement in the act, there's a goal statement in the act, 30 by 30, 50 by 50, centering VCD, all those things that are written down there. So how does each pathway contribute to that? We're also asked in the planning elements of section 2804 of the act, which says you should deliver a plan that has the following things. It asked us to consider equity and access and expanded equity and access. So how does each pathway do that? Are there equity considerations that we should be thinking about? And then for sure, the findings of Act 59 point out how interrelated this work is with other initiatives, the Forest Future Roadmap, the Wildlife and Forest Action Plans, TMDLs and basin plans, the Food Security Roadmap to 2035. There's the Climate Action Plan and the Resilience implementation strategy. So the act names a lot of those things, and others sort of obviously fit in. So how do complementary actions, how does conservation support those complementary initiatives? Many of them do center land protection as part of their goals. So how do we help SCORP? How do we help Forest Future? How do we help Food Security Roadmap by doing good conservation work? So that's all at the pathway level, right? So then as you build out the actions, there'll be several actions under each pathway, sort of like, what's the action? What are the sub-actions? What do they accomplish? What are our targets and metrics? What is whoever is responsible for kind of leading this and convening the people who are participating in it? What are they measuring and reporting back on, right? Like, how do we know whether, people have asked, are we going to do something or will this sit on the shelf? So we want these actions to be smart, that we want them to be measurable. We want them to be articulate. We want them to be realistic. They want, all the sort of smart acronym. We think at the sort of high level, as we publish this, we want to acknowledge who's the lead implementer or implementers who are going to be responsible to say whether we're moving forward or not. Who are the key partners, right? That gets to be a broader list, and it's hard to be totally inclusive, but we want to acknowledge and get to people and ask, does this make sense? And you want to participate? And then what are the resource considerations, right? Is this currently fully funded, this activity? Most of them aren't. So, what new capacities and innovations and such do we need before we move forward? So you have that, and then you also have the handout for that shows this with the climate resilience action that nests under so there's a climate resilience pathway, and then there's an action that we've put there for you to look at as well today. So what we'd like to do for the next few minutes is, maybe for about 10 minutes, is sort of taking a look at this template as well as how it's articulated in a specific example. Like, is there something missing from the template? Is there something that doesn't feel right? Is there something that is unclear or confusing? And what we really want to get to is, does this provide a workable structure to respond to the planning mandate and the act, but also, so to aim towards goals, but also to include that broad vision? So are we capturing the way to do this in a way that's going to be actionable and measurable, but also tie into those values, that culture, that spirit that's part of land protection? So it's 10.
Sorry, I've handed out the template and the fact sheet. So we'll do the worksheet with questions
Yeah.
and the climate resilience.
Yeah,
example. Okay.
So there's a climate resilience example coming around, and then those 3 questions that I just asked are coming around as well. So, but most importantly, what's missing, what's confusing, and does this allow us to create measurable progress? People asked right before the break, are we going to do something here? Are we changing and improving the status quo? It should be, if that's our goal, and I think it is, then we need to be able to set, when I try to lose weight, I usually start by stepping on the scale, although I don't always like that strategy because it's usually bad news to begin with, but you need data. And so how are we starting? What are we aiming towards? It's about 10:45 now, so let's take like 7-10 minutes right now for you all to be able to kind of read through that, look at that template in the abstract, look at that action example, and then those 3 questions will come back together.
Questions are on the table if you want to get those around, Trey.
Okay. Yes.
Question, Trey?
Yes.
Should we dig into the template and these questions before or look at the example prior to answering the questions? What's the?
Nick just asked a good question. Are we asking you to just focus on the template? And I think the conversation we want to have today is really about the template. How are we structuring this? But I find it really helped us when we were trying to develop the template to try and write it out. So looking at it in action, we invite you to look at both as you think about that. You may also have comments on the substance of that example, but that's not the total focus today. But we also, if you can't help but say this doesn't work or it doesn't make sense to me, that's on the table.
Focusing on feedback to the structure and content of the template rather than the specific action.
Yeah, but whatever
On the table.
whatever strikes you is on the table.
I'm going to leave a couple of the objectives and pathways copies on tables too, if that's helpful for anyone.
Is there any way to include those of us on Zoom? Can you include it in the chat for those of us on Zoom?
I think Gunnar is trying to upload those onto the chat right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, so I think Gunnar just put the questions in the chat, and then Hannah, there's a link at the beginning of the chat to the whole meeting packet. So all the documents you just handed out in the room are PDF and we'll slate before. Gunnar will drop that in again. We'll make sure.
Oh, that would be perfect. Thank you.
You got it.
For those of us who were not present at the beginning of the meeting, we do not have access to anything posted before we arrived at the meeting on the chat.
Okay.
If that could be posted again, that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that. Gunnar just did that.
You'll see lots of heads bent and pencils moving, so we're 2 or 3 more minutes. I think it's on the website somewhere. Okay. Another minute, it looks like. Yep. right? This is like pretty meaty, so we could just keep writing and thinking, but I'm gonna see if people are ready here to start, kind of, same as we just did, you know, if everybody has one or more, Nick, comments that they want to do, we want to hear as much perspectives as possible and also ask, we've got more public comment later, so if you want to address these questions there from our guests, hold on to those thoughts. But does anybody want to get us started? Does anybody have any clarifying questions here about the template or how the example comes out? And then we can run right into those if there's anything that's confusing or seems to be missing. Yep,
So this,
Mr. Get us started. Thank you. Yeah.
that lead on. This isn't a clarifying question, but just, I know we're not sort of focusing directly on that example, but this is more a comment on sort of an overarching thing that I would really like to see the state keep front of mind when we talk about equity. One of the ways that I see equity in an environmental sense is maintaining access to those Vermonters who rely on wild places for nutrition, food, which is really, really critical component. I mean, there's a woman, Meredith Niles, up at UVM, who's one in their food sciences department, did a bunch of research on this last year, equating like Vermont's annual deer harvest to actual meals, and then studying the demographics of like where whatever those licenses are sold and so on. And it is like, the bottom line is that this is a very, very important resource to a group that is below median income in Vermont, as far as like the total population of license holders goes. And I think I would really love to see that be one of the front of mind considerations when we talk about equity, as it pertains to these conservation projects, is maintaining that access to that food resource, the people that are often reliant on it. I just like that to be kind of in the front of mind considerations.
It's good. We have been thinking a lot about what are the different points to address under those headings, because all the different pathways are a little different, but that's a good one that can get woven through lots of places. Go ahead, Emily.
I'm gonna build on that. I really appreciate that. And I feel like my comments are definitely about the equity consideration. And again, thinking about process, I think that we need to encourage as much specificity as possible. I think that that's important as leaders of organizations in particular who are practicing and figuring out how to work in equitable ways, that we need as much structure and support to be as specific as possible moving forward. And like, I read this and I say it says here, equity consideration. And then it says, describe the public interest benefits that, for all Vermonters, which is not equity. What we should be doing is focusing on the ways that this pathway is impacting people who are suffering from economic injustice, don't have access, who have disabilities, who are from a minority race like we should be focused on that with equity, not on all. It's not that we shouldn't say, how will this benefit all? But I don't think that that's equity. And so I just think we need to be as specific as possible. And I think then when we get into the actions that are coming out of we need to make sure that we're tying back into those equity considerations. If it says here, for example, in the climate resilience, that it's important to coordinate work with community-focused organizations and partners, then in the actions, we need to name the community-focused organizations and partners who need to be at the table and not just the state agencies. So again, I'm just thinking like I think specificity will really matter. Like how specific can we get and how much support can we give the partners who are engaged in this work to like think really specifically about what that means and not just say like everybody benefits.
Heard. Nick and Lynn.
I'm happy to love the equity piece. When I just looking at the template at first, I just wrote down that phrase for versus with. And I think the with it might be more of an inclusivity aspect, but it very much reads to some degree as like, who will our actions benefit versus how will we work with those people to move this forward in some ways. So like how will individuals or how will there be equity in the process, but in sort of the effort of this action? And I reflected on it a little bit because it was like, well, maybe that doesn't belong there. Maybe that's more inclusivity than equity. But then I think it was helpful to have the specific example here because in reading through the action, to me, this felt a bit like, and perhaps in some ways tying into Zach's comment, a bit sort of business as usual. Like we will, from sort of top down, identify priority zones, figure out the landowners we're going to work with, secure funding, engage in that process and secure those parcels. There's the idea, I think, and it could fall in a couple of areas. I think even in the key partners, I noted they're like, can we have more creativity here? Is there an opportunity to work with? It could be, this is my head on, like recreation organizations that are interested in also having other values for those floodplains that might be able to exist in certain zones in a harmonious way, or key hunting areas, for example, to like, let's secure that we can protect the climate resilience aspect of it, while also sort of working with organizations that have other interests in them. So like, how can we sort of work outside the box? And even in that note, I mean, there could be key partners and it could be framed as like, this is our traditional approach. That could even be an exercise for the public or for others. Like, who else should we think about working with and how? Like, how might we bring others into the fold here? And the specific example in looking at climate resilience that I thought of is, a few years ago in Waterbury, there was identified this floodplain zone that was a key, if conserved and if restored, to be a sort of a buffer zone, could have ameliorated or prevented a significant amount of flooding for Irene. The town attempted to secure that zone so it could be established as this climate barrier, and the landowner wasn't interested. They wanted to, I think they used it to run their horses. And it was very much engaged as a sort of business as usual model. At the end of the day, it's their land. They could decide whether or not they want to participate. But it felt like if there had been more effort around that, as you phrase it, Trey, like the ethic around conservation, or the community aspect, or if the community had been brought in and involved and put together a vision as to why this was important and collectively engaged that landowner and talked about, well, how could we that felt like those kind of creative solutions might be necessary to actually move the needle. Because if we'd applied the same approach to that situation, we would still be where we are, which we wouldn't be able to conserve that land. It wouldn't serve as a buffer zone. So that idea of like, where can we think outside the box and not do things sort of business as usual with this approach?
I imagine that there will be like, at least as we start this and share it at the regional stakeholder level in February and March, 3 to 5 actions under each pathway. So this is just the one thing I wanted to note, not to be defensive, but to say there could be 3 or 4 more actions under this pathway. So this wasn't the one action to bring about all the things from above. This is one that we thought of that was really actually threaded the needle really well of having kind of specific, like measurable land conservation outcomes while also sustaining that bigger vision. But there are many other things that I think do go here and that get to what people are saying, but we could have measured different actions for those too. Anyways, I wanted to add that out there so that people don't, as you think about this one action doesn't have to hold all of that. And this one pathway interacts with a lot of other pathways too. So Shelby, Lynn and then Shelby, I think was the sequence.
Thanks. 2 different things.
And Lynn, can you introduce yourself because you?
Yeah. I'm Lynn Mono. I'm the director of Watersheds United Vermont.
Hey, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we're WAV. But the first thing is around the naming around like lead implementer, ANR and VHCB, and then key partners. And I was thinking about the fact that I think it would be good to clarify like who's doing the work, and that those folks should maybe be identified as the implementers. And then maybe to your point, maybe there's like, so it might need to be
the champions versus
category. Like there's like the people who are like the lead of sort of making sure this is like overall being like tracked and all of that. And then there's the implementers who's actually like doing the work, which I think in some cases are the partners that you've listed, like the conservation districts, the watershed groups, the land trust, like the folks who are doing the work, and then the sort of partners who are maybe have a role in some other way. So just thinking that it might be that we need slightly different language and slightly different, maybe 2 sets of categories, because to make sure that it's not, people aren't just partners, they're the ones who are actually doing the implementing. And it might just be that like in this work, we often talk about like project implementers. That's the term we use to mean like the folks going out and doing the, restoration, conservation work. So that's one. And then the other thing I was just curious, a question around the targets and metrics and whether you're thinking about those as being net or gross. And thinking about where we're capturing losses if we're trying to achieve our goals. Because if we look at this, like acres of wetlands and, you know, in this example, we could like have awesome numbers here and we could actually be taking a step back if we're also having losses in certain areas or, you know, be it like losses based on, you know, a flood event that maybe takes out a whole bunch of buffers you've just planted or whatever it is in this case, or maybe sort of, you know, human cause like land conversion or whatever it is. So just think it would be important to figure out how we're capturing whether this is net or gross and how we're capturing losses.
Like specific outcomes versus systemic outcomes to like how connected is a stream and wetland complex versus like how many acres do you protect?
Yeah, I was thinking more just like this is looking at like, you know, if you're just looking at it, it's like acres that are conserved annually, but did we lose some as well? So are we looking at, what are we looking at? We want to see that difference between the gain and the, otherwise we may be doing like awesome work and still actually taking steps backwards. Does that make sense? Okay.
Absolutely.
It sounds like it resonates.
Okay.
Good. Shelby and then yeah, Elise and Jamie and Tracy.
Yeah, I'll my comment would and more substantively question relates to metrics as well. And I think that Lynn's suggestion around tracking both gross and net is just spot on. I'd love to sort of emphasize the value of probably including both of those things where applicable. I am curious for both VHCB, FPR, or ANR, and others in the room who work with people-centered metrics. I'm kind of curious to gauge the maturity of the like state of play generally for tracking people-oriented metrics. And I ask that from the perspective of someone who's representing an organization that has worked pretty hard in defining some like baseline outdoor access metrics. At Trust for Public Land, we work a lot with this 10-minute walk to a park as being sort of a one benchmark of access. And I know even just within that like very, very, very targeted and limited measure and benchmark, we see that is insufficient to describing the quality of the experience that someone, you know, has access to, even if the walkable half mile is easy to measure, the likelihood that if you are a resident that has that level of access, that you're actually taking advantage of it. But it's something. And I'm kind of curious if others have a perspective on that, and just like knowing how fraught getting any sort of measure is. And the land trust community for ages has really struggled to get beyond acres and bucks. And Act 59 is obviously a very acreage oriented exercise. And I feel very strongly that people-centered measures have to be on the board here, but it's going to be incredibly complicated and guaranteed to be insufficient. So I'm just curious how others have interacted with that, how mature ANR and VHCB feel that like even a draft set of measures there is within the thinking. And then maybe the last question is for those in the room that have studied other 30 by 30 plans, like is there somewhere we could adopt that has figured it out pretty well, other states that we could Vermontize? So there's a lot in that, but curious if there's any reactions.
There was a lot in that, and but I'll see if partners have quick reactions. Oliver and Gunnar from FPR's perspective, welcome to weigh in. Gus Seelig has joined us as well, so Gus or Isaac is in Annie. But first, you know, go ahead.
Yeah, Shelby, thanks for the question. you know, I can't speak for all of the Agency of Natural Resources. I'm sorry, where's the camera? I'm trying to feel like
Little right here.
oh, good. Okay. I was looking at Shelby.
I keep looking at speaking and I see
I know.
my head.
I know.
What I can say is there are people, I think that I would say there's a medium level of maturity of people scattered metrics in what A&R does across the different departments. I think we probably started with the more quantitative acres of different forest types measures historically, but that's evolved. What I can say is, I lead the Division of Forestry. We have a strategic plan. That strategic plan has 12 metrics, and 2 of them are explicitly people focused. I pulled, one of them is physical access to nature, number of towns in the state with at least one publicly accessible outdoor recreation trailhead. That's not exactly similar to your 10-minute walk to a park, but it's sort of thinking about the same thing. There's also some that are sort of try to blend human needs with biophysical parameters, like the % urban tree canopy cover in census defined urban areas. So we have a lot of work left to do, I think, to have better human-centered metrics to gauge the success or lack thereof of our resource conservation work, which is our mandate. But it's something that we've started to think about, and I'm happy to share with you. Our strategic plan is up on our website, so you can check it out if you're interested. And we're only one division and one department in a very big agency, so I can't speak to. I know that DEC and Fish and Wildlife are doing very similar work as well, but I'd rather that their experts and representatives speak on their behalf.
And I'll just add that recreation staff in the Division of Plants Administration and Recreation in FPR working on over the next, I don't know the specifics, it's not mine, I think, but over the next year or so too, working on an analysis of access to preserved lands and recreational resources in communities across the state. So that's the process. I don't know.
Thanks.
Can you summarize what Gunnar just?
Yeah, I was going to say, for Gunnar was just talking about it also within FPR with the recreation staff really focused on access, the numerics and the people-centered kind of data around access to recreational and outdoor recreational opportunities. So that's part of SCORP, I would imagine, the outdoor recreation planning process for the state. And then, Gus, you can add to this if you want, but very quickly on VHCBs, we do a lot of data production. We do a lot of acres and bucks data production, but we also do a lot of qualitative data production for the legislature and in our annual reporting. And so we're really familiar with that and definitely would agree that there are lots of places within this plan framework where people-focused data should be part of what we measure. Gus, do you want to add anything to that?
Planning a plan for the legislature that if we fail to include people, we won't get the people's support. So it's pretty integral whether somebody wants to hunt, mountain bike, take photographs, hike, or have some serenity in a wild area. We have to figure out how to tell that story and how to measure it as best we can. And I agree with Shelby that whatever we come up with will be the best we can do today, but likely inadequate and will work over time.
Anybody else want to respond to that specific question? Otherwise, I'm going to go back to Elise and then Jamie and Tracy. Nick and then Chris, go ahead.
I think it does touch on the tension between the sophistication of some of the measures and ecological values that exist here in terms of VCD and the maturity of that versus being able to look at impacts, and it kind of going back to the original comment around who does this benefit and how. Perhaps there's an opportunity, having previous life been a consultant, thinking about if we can weave in more like a semi-quantitative or just a sense of to what degree does this improve access for particular groups or improve health for particular groups? Or there could be a sense if we're thinking about scoring these actions, some could be a home run in certain categories, but it could be if the metrics aren't equally sophisticated across the board, there could be an opportunity to create sort of a tiering for low, medium, high. This is a really high value for access, or it's a really high value for human health, but it's not as actually that much of a value for ecological. It does to think about how is this ticking the different boxes.
Excellent.
I just want to respond to Shelby's question about maybe another state that's undergoing the same process. So the state of Maine, of course, as many of you know, is also having a 30 by 30 and a 50 by 50, and I think they're a year or two ahead of us. So that might be something to the group to look at and see how they're coming along and some of the issues that they're facing.
I'll make sure we upload it back onto the portal, but we looked at Maine, Maryland, and California really closely, and we looked at all the states doing this. So we'll get those examples up there as well so people can see that. We'll talk to the portal host.
Do you want all thoughts or do you want?
All thoughts? All thoughts that you can
Okay.
stitch together.
All right.
We'll come back to you if you can't.
Feel free to just interrupt if someone else wants to dive in. First off, I really appreciate seeing the template and seeing an example. It's really helpful to dive in, and I think you hear that in the substantive comments around it. So thank you for doing the work. Just in response to your questions, in kind of looking at the template and then the example, I think this relates a little bit to what you were saying, Nick, but I would really urge us to think about how do we prioritize these actions and sub-actions? We're going to get a litany. And so how do we actually think about creating some sort of prioritization within them so it doesn't feel when everything's a priority, nothing is a priority, and so nothing actually gets done. And so, maybe it's a prioritization, as you were saying, based on what's, at a home run for conservation values versus access. You could think about that. You could think about what's kind of more of a focus area versus kind of like a big bet versus opportunistic, but some sort of organizing structure so we can think about the actions would be helpful. I was also thinking in the template that the actions that primary action is quite broad, and then it seems like the sub actions are where the rubber meets the road. And I think that as you're going through them, there are likely going to be different lead implementers and resource considerations for the sub actions rather than just the actions. And that's going to balloon out your plan. But I do think being as specific as possible about for the sub actions, that's where it's really specific, like who's going to be leading those sub actions? What are the metrics that we are really looking at for those sub actions rather than bucketing it up and making it really general to just the primary action? I think that's a challenge that you're going to run into. Second thought was on resource considerations. Can we get really specific on numbers? What do we actually need in order to implement this? In your example, resource considerations are pretty broad. Current investment should be augmented. How much? Like, what do we actually need? And I noted in here that there's, in the resource considerations, it feels like there's almost an interplay between different actions that might come up. So in the resource considerations, you say there needs to be, additional capacity at different organizations. Capacity building might actually be an action that you need within our conservation community. And so I wonder if there's a way of like referencing connection to different actions. So saying like this action around protecting and restoring Vermont's natural resource infrastructure will also be bolstered by these other actions so that you can create the link, but not muddy it too much in a single one. I have a couple more, but I'm going to let someone else go.
I think Jamie, then Tracy.
All right, thanks. I think this is really helpful as far as a framework to be able to just respond to. And I think there's a lot of really good good components in here. Just a couple of quick thoughts. Before the complementary initiatives and programs, it would be helpful if there's sort of a basic overview of the current approach, just like the strengths and gaps as far as like what exists, and then sort of where are the gaps on the conservation side. Complementary initiatives maybe nibbles at that a little bit, but having that and then sort of a nod to other complementary initiatives. So I don't know if that somehow gets woven into that or those are two separate things, but I think that would help set the stage so that we understand there are existing policies and then here are where we're going with new actions. And then another thought towards the end is maybe identifying where there's continuing research or exploration or necessary continuing steps. So some of these actions, we know there's going to need to be additional work identified.
I think some actions or sub-actions may actually be, like Elise said, like ongoing processes or investigations too. Some of them are like build this program, but some might be convene stakeholders in order to create this process and an outcome, a conversation about an equity framework for decision making, or something like that. That's an ongoing engagement. So think creatively about that as well. Remember though that like Tracy, I'm sorry, I'm talking over your spot here, but at the end of the day, what the statute directs A&R to do is report every 2 years on how many more acres have been added. Period. So we're gonna have to figure out a way to report on all of this in a meaningful way, but it's the agency is not, it's not their job. And I don't think, unless we build the capacity there to do more of that kind of reporting, that more generalized reporting, it's going to fall to this community to figure out a way to do that in a comprehensive way. And I think it could be both, hopefully, but yeah, go ahead, Tracy.
All right. Yeah, I have like tons of notes, but I have a couple things. I'll echo Lynn's comments about implementer, who, I think that could use a little work in here. I also will echo that it's like exciting to see this. If there's three objectives with 3 to 5 pathways, each with 3 to 5 actions per pathway, that's a lot of pages. And it also, as I was looking at this example, it feels very siloed, because when I look at this particular example, and I'm a lumper, not a splitter, so that's probably partly just the way I see things. But, I see this as also centering conservation design and the pathway around aquatic and riparian systems. I see it also to your point about, strengthening conservation capacity. So yeah, thinking about, can there be just the intersectionality of this? Like, it's great to have it all mapped out with these headings. And then and we talked about that early graphic where there was like the center. We moved away from that because we can't achieve all things on each conservation opportunity, but we achieve a lot within conservation opportunities. And maybe it's something around a rubric or some sort of ranking that does look at where conservation opportunity, if like this is coming to VCP as a funding opportunity, where are you kind of advancing numerous objectives and pathways through actions was coming up for me. And then lastly, around people-centered metrics, totally agree with that. What was coming up on this exact example was like under complementary initiatives, like I would say that this work is helping to protect our downtowns and some of our most vulnerable communities located close to rivers. And so I think you could think about like what other on these tension points are we working towards with these actions, to again think about some of our other human needs and how conservation is advancing those, and then how could we be more equitably advancing those by calling out or prioritizing our most flood prone areas or underserved communities. So I'll stop there.
Anybody else with a first reaction?
I really appreciate the section about complementary initiatives and programs. I think that's really key, is to just say from the very get-go, like, here's how this connects to all these other things. And kind of, as we've talked about earlier, if this plan can't do everything, let's at least talk about how it connects to everything. And then just maybe a nuance, or not a nuance, but a small thing is just defining what we mean. We talk about easements, strategic purchases. What does that mean for someone who's reading this who might not be a part of the conservation world? And then also words like protect and restore. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So just maybe that comes later, like as the actions are kind of coming together, but making sure that that we're really specific about what we mean by that. And also, if we're going to be creative, like what are the other tools in the toolbox? We have easements, we have strategic purchases. Those are only 2 tools in our toolbox. I'm sure there's more, kind of like making sure that we're bringing in all those different strategies.
Yes.
I was following up on a lot of what came up is the first thing that I'm going to go to the actions. That's the first thing I'm going to be wanting to look at. And if I have to go through a document with all this different stuff, it's going to drive me nuts. And so I think other people are, what's a way you're going to have a printed copy of something, but I think that this is really going to be ideal to have some sort of web-based tool where you can intersect different actions, activities, metrics, how things cross connect and things like that. You have to have a paper document that people can see, but I think having something online would be really good. And it sounds like a lot of other people had that same, maybe slightly different from what I'm thinking, but yeah, I think that was one of the big things that I saw. And then I think the other thing, there's the specificity on some of the things. I think that's good, but also with the plans, how much specificity is good because you want enough leeway to be able to incorporate new science, incorporate new techniques, do things like that. So there's a balance there on how much specificity. I think that was talking about like the equity considerations, be more specific about that. But definitely as you get down to actions and target metrics and things like that, I'm curious how this plan can adapt as it goes forward. Because once it hits the street, it's, as planners like to say, it's kind of dead on arrival, right? You put it out and it's just this thing, and but to keep it living as we go along in the future years.
Those are great. Thank you both. Those are great additions. And I do think that I think we've imagined, like Isaac keeps reminding me that as we draft, we need to have like bold titles and first sentences. And so that online, this can collapse down to like a 3 or 4 page, accordion, like condensed. And then you can click on things and expand them, and kind of like, that would be a way to be able to see this. And then I think about like at a regional listening session, how do we surround the room with a storyboard that people can walk through and see all the different things as well? And maybe have one of those things that you put your phone next to, the barcode. And so people who are more comfortable with that could also be there and like have their laptop and expand it and flex it. So really, I think there's some fun informatics also in terms of tracking it. If the legislature really wants to hear every other year how many more acres were added, where do we keep a dashboard that we build out of this, that, and who can help to keep that moving with both the permanent conservation outcomes, right? So your easements and land acquisitions, Krista, which the legislature is really interested by 2030. But I think we're all really interested in like, hey, are we creating more viability for working farms and forests? Are we creating more access to recreation? Are we addressing some of the like barriers to market for rural enterprises? How are we doing those things, and how do we report that back out? Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Monica, can you hold your comment till public comment later?
Just a quick, reflecting on Tracy's comment, Greg, I think that as this is developed, the more it's possible to create categorizations of these things, even if we're thinking of like, we talked about outcomes and perhaps I even wrote down like, when we thought about partners, it makes sense to have some kind of a RACI designation of sort of who is lead, responsible, supported, consulted, informed. Like maybe that's not the right framework, but just if there are ways to create those tags, there's an opportunity. You mentioned a database. We think about the web view. If this goes to where every action is a bespoke narrative, that's going to be impossible for people to digest, to your point, Tracy. If there's an opportunity to categorize things such that view can be pivoted, like I want to see all the actions that are relevant to this particular partner, or I want to see all the actions that are relevant to this outcome and different levels. Like, I could easily rank order, like if I'm interested in the equity or like the access or what have you, I can click a button and see like, okay, and that kind of tries to create better connections, or what other, even if it's primary pathway, but there could be supported pathways or linked pathways. So just as this is being constructed and envisioned, the potential to create that structure could enable that pivoting in a way for people to access the information in a way that works for them versus like the single narrative in terms of how it's told. And to know, even if I'm a partner, like I'm a landowner, what are the different ways I'm involved in something? Like here's the landowner view of like, these are the critical, it's probably gonna be all of them, but the ways that you're kind of involved in the actions.
Yeah, thank you. I search like in a Excel where you can pick which table.
The pivot table brain for personal information, but obviously like not that productive.
second comments from anybody who has things bubbling back up? Or anybody who hasn't had a chance to share something? Second comment from Elise. Oh, no, Chris first. Yeah.
I don't have, sorry, I don't have much to add to what Tony even said, but I just have a point of clarity with the key partners. Wondering who will decide who these key partners are. Is that something that this committee will address, or will you?
Well, we'll ultimately recommend to the legislature a final version of this, but this has been a hard thing for us to be totally included. Like, this is where you damn yourself by including so many, but not on all. You know, like we really feel like we're really nervous about putting this out there because we don't want to be like, oh, we forgot to include conservation commissions or, you know, whatever. So your feedback will help us really flesh this out to be targeted and inclusive at that sort of lead implementer and champion level, right? And it says ANR and VHCB in the template, but that's actually an error. That was just because the one that we were looking at seemed like we were starting there, but there may be other people who are that kind of like key champion besides ANR and VHCB too as we go out there. But the more attenuated it becomes from the agency and its reporting function, the more we have to build a really good cohesive way to do that the dashboard. Alex?
Really quick, just to piggyback off what Chris said earlier, you're talking about looking at other states that are enacting similar policies. I think it would be really interesting for you guys to look at the Adirondacks in retrospect. This is a place that, it's very similar acreage to Vermont, that has almost exactly 50% permanently conserved. It would be a really interesting case study to look at what has and has not worked over there, because there are social things that have really not worked. In terms of the tangible, like acreage question, it's been a smashing success. But in terms, I have like personally from there serious concerns about the durability of some of it because of like local sentiment, which all sort of, in my mind, sort of spills out of the way that a lot of the APA's rulings and power was granted to the APA without a lot of input from local people. And even the Adirondacks is not that well protected long term, really, if public sentiment is opposed to it. 2 consecutive state legislatures can amend the charter, which is kind of everything. So it'd be really interesting. That's a little overarching and rambling, but like it would be really interesting to include like a real thorough case study of the Adirondacks, like in the last 100 years. You're thinking about what to take and to change about the way that the APA's existence came about. It'll inform where this is going, I think, in a lot of ways.
And fascinating that it's roughly the same size,
right there,
roughly the same kind of goal outcome, and not all the social outcomes have been positive.
They're locally overwhelming in that.
Yeah.
Trey, am I correct? You mentioned earlier that this feedback on the template will be useful and will be incorporated, but then VHCB will bring back to this group next year the actual actions that are drafted to review, and tax review is sort of content review as opposed to content creation. So as I was thinking about that, if three objectives, 15 pathways, is that correct? 15 pathways. Each pathway has maybe 3 to 5 actions, somewhere between 45 and a higher number of actions, which will form the basis for the future conservation plan. Easily looking at this template and hearing some of the comments about additional detail, specificity, figuring out what the right level is to include some of these cross-cutting text and cross-cutting details. I could easily see each action leading to 1 or 2 pages of text, if not more, depending on how detailed you get. So you're looking at over 100 pages of text around a conservation plan. So that, I think, really speaks to some of Greg and Chris and other people's comments about having the accordion and being able to build it out. But is that what we want? Do we want conservation plan with that much detail and that dense as the product of this group's work? I think I'll be part of the content creation. I work for ANR. ANR and VHCB will be working on this, and it'd be great to hear from sort of the TAC, like yes, we want more detail starting out. And if it's too long, we can always edit it down because that's where the content, the TAC is the content review body, or no, we don't want 100 pages of text. No one's going to read that. How do we synthesize this and make it more action oriented, more direct?
What do you all think? Thank you for reading our mail so carefully, Oliver. Jamie, yeah, Kristen and then Jamie, yeah.
I'm a writer by trade. I know that no one reads, so it's sort of like this depressing thing. But I think that there is such immense value in the specificity that so many people have mentioned and the practical, tangible things that we can do, and people being able to see a way for them to interact. Like Nick was saying, if I'm a landowner and I can click around and say, like, here's what I can do. Like, that's how we get people engaged in the plan. And I think in order to do that, I think it has to be somewhat comprehensive and long. And I think maybe if we assume that most people aren't going to read the whole thing, but that there are avenues for them to plug in at various points, then we're not asking them to read 100 pages. It's more of, 2 or 3 that interest them. So I'm comfortable with it being long.
Thank you.
Well, maybe
I agree. I mean, I think for the plan, we do need details, especially to be able to act and understand as, those organizations and agencies and legislators that are interested in different actions, they'll want the detail there. But for the public, I think we need some kind of public facing executive summary or something that can make it easily digestible. And then folks will know there's this larger resource.
I think the way, Elise in just a second, but I think the way California did this, they tried to balance these two things by having a really a fairly short, like when you say, what's the California 30 by 30 plan? It's, if you just printed it out, it's like publicly accessible, like first level, it's a few pages. But then there's hundreds of pages of like annexes and information that hides behind that. So that not only maybe we're thinking about accordion within the framework, but also accordion within the whole, like the package of what this plan is. It's like, so I'm really hearing we need a really good overview that presents it, neatly in a few pages, and then maybe the framework itself becomes like the appendix.
And maybe there's an opportunity. There's been comments kind of from the beginning about the very accessibility of this plan. And perhaps maybe it's not even a question of length, it's depth. Like in the idea of the plan is designed from the outset to be, as you were saying, and not even, and I think there could be some hesitancy or some concern even about creating things where the information is too difficult to access or lives too far behind, or there's an appendix, but it's 475 pages and you have to search through it or use AI or whatever. But it's like, if we think about the construct from the beginning of trying to make it an engaging front face and its layers where people can peel back where they want to engage or their opportunities, it's, again, if the information is categorized such that people can pivot and view the report the way they want to look at it. So just like the design outside of how can we make sure that anybody coming to this report with a level of education, with a particular interest, can look at it and be able to access information that's relevant to them, not having to go start to finish. And honestly, it might help in framing the report the plan isn't even linear in nature. It's not do 175 of these things and at the end of the finish line we'll be able to high five each other. It's like there's a huge menu of things that are going to be happening in parallel. So thinking less around like it's a length from a start to finish. This is the net we're casting across all these different efforts.
Yes, Elise.
I think without specificity, it's not actionable. I think if you just stay, high level, it just is not actionable. So I hear you on the length, and I think we need specificity in order for it to be useful and not just be a report that sits on a shelf. And I will go back to the prioritization piece, that if you're going to have a really long document, like how do we prioritize within it to say, like, what do you absolutely need to do in order to achieve 30 by 30 and 50 by 50? It gets uncomfortable. Folks don't like prioritizing. We don't like to weigh what's more important and what's less important. But in a constrained funding environment and constrained capacity environment, we need to do that so that you can focus in it. It's not to say that it's not important for, groups to be working on everything across the plan, but if we're going to have a very long plan and document, I do think there needs to be some sort of prioritization.
I thank you for bringing that up again. When you mentioned that earlier, I was thinking of the Vermont Forest Future Strategic Roadmap, over 30 actions, but the advisory group that assembled that document pulled out 10 as short-term high priority actions, and they had a specific page or section in the roadmap to say, here's where we want to start. That's still a lot. This 10 is still a ton, but at least they made an effort to boil it down. So maybe something similar would be useful.
And I think we haven't quite wrapped our head around how to resolve this question because we don't want to pick winners and losers. And VHCB in consultation with ANR hasn't been invited to pick the winners and losers. We've been invited to propose a set of recommendations for consideration, authorization, funding at the legislative level. But I do think as a group, we're going to continue to talk about this. Like what are priorities that we need to put out there that also unlock other things in here? So is it capacity stuff? Is it changes to VHCB's guidelines and policies? Is it a new program that comes online? How do we do those for 2030 for that permanent conservation? And then is there a separate kind of timetable to get to 2050 where we can not only do permanent conservation, but we get to, Krista, you brought up a few different meetings, like all the tools. Like for 2050, the legislation broadens the concept of what conservation means to not just permanent, but permanent and durable, measurable, et cetera. So I think that, but we've struggled with how to do that in a way that doesn't cause this group to go back to where we started, which is like, no, this is the priority. No, this is the priority. And so this will push us. And I think it'll be a good thing to push ourselves to do that. Last thing I'm going to do before I'm going to turn it over to Isaac for another exercise before we have public comment and then lunch. Isaac's going to kind of walk through some timeline stuff with us. So I want to say one more thing, see if there's any wrapping comments. Then Isaac is going to do that, and then we'll have some more public comment. The thing that I was going to say, going forward, Oliver, you asked it, and I think you're more or less accurate. Are we producing content for reaction with the TAC? Yes. We've been working, and it's really hard. That's the reason why it's taking so long to even show you one template and one action, even though we've been drafting and redrafting across this framework for months now. It just is hard to get that level of detail right, to make it look smart and actionable. So we've been taking more time, hopefully, to write you if not a shorter letter, a better one. And we are inviting you to take this template, take those objectives and pathways, and come to the January TAC meeting with ideas, right? So we do want some ideas from TAC and from the public who can contact us at any time. Like, here are actions we see fitting under these pathways. So there is like more of a sort of a co-content development discussion that we're planning for January. So it may be that some people are going to just focus on, hey, here's a pathway I really care about. I'll bring some ideas, or maybe some people will focus on certain themes across the pathways. But whatever time you have to prepare, and you can reach out to Annie and Isaac and me for help with that, we're inviting you to come to January with not just a reaction to what we send you, but your own ideas as well. And that's how that's how the only way VHCB can do this. And every time we sit down, we think, hey, we've really thought through this whole thing. And then we sit down and talk with you, and like, wow, so many good questions and needs. So that's the iterative process that we're hoping for. So any last questions, comments, or yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, just going back to the priority, and I think it's good to have, shorter term, short list priorities, but it is, in a group like this, trying to come up with priorities, criteria, maybe that's where this group could focus on, is what are the criteria for the 2030 versus 2050 actions.
Yep.
So
Helen and VHCB staff have been talking a little bit about how to do that, not just kind of broadly what's a smart action, but also specifically in Act 59. Yes.
I think this is part of the process piece that's going to be covered, but I was curious, like the targets and metrics section, I'm assuming that there are going to be numbers associated with those metrics, at least for some of them, at least for getting to 30 by 30 and 50 by 50. And I guess my question is, at some point after all of the actions have been created, there'll be a little bit of an assessment of like, does this actually get us there? Like, do we have some confidence that everything we've put together actually completes the whole?
Yes,
Great, perfect.
that's our job, together and with the regional stakeholders and with the folks we do stakeholder-specific outreach in the spring, and then we're gonna have another round of those in the late spring and more public opportunities to weigh in. So hopefully that's what we're assessing. And hopefully we agree that this gets there across that broad vision, but with the specificity to measure. So park this for now. If you wake up over break and you have questions, please email me or text me, call me. I'm semi-working and would love if you're starting to prepare or early in the new year, if anybody from the TAC or from the Friends wants to sit down and talk about, continuing to think about this, totally invite those calls and outreach. But
Hand up back there.
Yeah.
oh yeah, thank you, Hannah. Go ahead.
Thank you. The California website, 30 by 30, is incredible, by the way. I would really encourage you to check it out, 30 by 30 California. I was wondering, are there any examples, I asked in the chat, of 50 by 50 model out there? Or has...
Not that I've seen. I don't know if we've turned that up in our research yet. Is anybody aware of an extant 50 by 50 plan? No. Yeah, so I don't think so yet, Hannah. And somebody said earlier, like looking at these other plans and Vermontizing them. And one way we have to Vermontize towards 2050 is like, what does durable and measurable and enforceable mean in addition to permanent? And what does that do?
Yeah.
Start thinking, is it like the wetlands program? Is it shoreland permitting program? Does that create a durable, enforceable protection for land? And I'm sure we'll debate that too.
And a follow-up question, the Adirondack point, that was really interesting. Was that a goal of the Adirondacks, or are they just happen to be 50% conserved?
No, that was really a function of what land was available for sale at the time and through the sort of 20 years past the APA creation. It was never actually a stated goal. So that is a difference between what the state of New York was trying to achieve and what Vermont is. But the end goal has been almost exactly 50% in public ownership and permanent conservation status.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more from you about what the problems have been. I think that
could go on.
I wish I was there for lunch.
I could recommend a book. I could if I could remember the name of the book, but I read a great book about that. I'll write it in an email to everybody because there's a really wonderful book about the creation of the APA that looks very soberly at what has and has not worked that I think would be really interesting reading for everybody involved in this project. Because there really I think there's some really important lessons to take away from it.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
Back last month when we met with you, we had a couple of extra.
Wild idea. Sorry.
A wild idea.
A wild idea. Yeah.
All right.
It was like 1890 something, right?
Well, so 1892 was the creation of the park. There was no like formal legal framework around any of it. It was like, there's the Adirondack Park, all that land up there, ... It wasn't until the 70s that the APA was formed, which is the regulating body around the Adirondack. So actually like formally creating zoning laws within the park and sort of a formal structure to it all rather than just having some state land, which is what the original 1892 creation of the park basically did, which established it was a purchase of a bunch of property.
Sorry. By this, and I want to hand it off to Isaac, who's having a diminishing amount of time to talk to you about next steps. But also, remember, after the last TAC meeting, we had 2 lunch sessions, and we've talked a little bit. We just have been so flat out since then. We didn't do more of those in the last few weeks, but in the new year, if that was something people enjoyed, we can topically do that. Like that might be a great thing to come around. And if other people have suggestions of kind of lunchtime discussions that we could facilitate, all the better. I'm going to hand out a timeline that Isaac's going to talk about for kind of where we go from here. We wanted to end with that public comment and then have some lunch together. Go ahead, Isaac.
Do we have handouts for the mini grant thing? Or
We do.
Okay, sweet. All right, so we can start with timelines here. And as we've been describing, we've been working on this template, starting to think through actions. And our plan is at the January TAC to bring you back a comprehensive set of actions under all of the pathways. In the framework that you received, probably with some modifications that relating to the discussions we just had. And so that's what we're going to be working on as we go towards January. So we can see that there is a January 22nd TAC meeting, which is sort of the next big thing that we're doing. You should expect to receive those actions in advance of that TAC meeting, so you have time to review and digest before the meeting. And then we're thinking about two different potential input abilities. One being the regional listening sessions, which will start in early February, Mondays in early February. So you can see the list of dates that we have there. So there'll be 5 opportunities around the state for the sort of similar style as the last time. Hopefully, we'll be getting a lot of good feedback there. We also wanted stakeholder groups to be able to get together and sort of have conversations about the actions themselves, sort of as a stakeholder group. And so we're setting up a second opportunity for input where there will be a pot of funds that are available for stakeholder groups to apply for to hold meetings with themselves that will be open to the public. But the idea is that those groups can be convening their people to talk about getting their input into this plan. And so we want there to be multiple different avenues, including those regional listening sessions and also the stakeholder listening sessions, which we're calling mini grants. Annie has a packet of information on those that I'm guessing you may not have the time to digest right now. But essentially, we will be providing more sort of material to help groups develop those meetings. So they don't feel like they've got to sort of generate a meeting agenda from scratch, but we do want people to be able to design their own meetings that work for their people. So those applications will be due January 19th. They will be going up on our website either today or tomorrow, depending on what the capacity is with the web person. But essentially, we want to be putting the word out as soon as possible so folks in January have time to develop applications. And so after that, we will make decisions on the awards to those stakeholder groups on January 30th. And the hope is that those meetings will be held prior to March 30th. There will also just be an open ability to submit comments through March 30th, just an open public comment period. And then you can see we are also planning on having an additional round of regional listening sessions once we have taken all of the input, incorporated it after we've released the draft actions. And so we want people to have a final comment period to see how we've incorporated that input. So I'll pause there and see what that generated in terms of questions. I know you're probably really digesting
I'm curious other people's reaction to having a grant round to be able to hold meetings, which I'm just like, oh, really? Like, if we want to have host meetings, we need to apply for it.
You can have a meeting without a grant.
Totally. It's just.
I guess.
Yeah.
No, but we have a pot of money that.
Right, but it's like, you have to be then part of one of these organized entity groups that's gonna apply for it and then potentially not get do you have enough funds that you'll be able to give money to land trusts to me, but not to watershed group? How competitive will these be? It's just, I'm just having this I don't know if anyone, maybe I'm just having grant fatigue, and then it's a lot of, that feels like a lot to ask organizing entities on a short notice.
A cap to the number of.
No, to the amount, dollar amount.
It's very. You can see it it's this interest form that we just handed out. We're hoping to make it really easy to turn around, but we do not have enough money to give every single group who does conservation. So we're hoping that people will think about how to propose a meeting that includes a lot of folks that have similar kind of perspectives. And if you have a heart, like, we're not asking for your audits and your, like, this is should be a very straightforward ask for that funding.
Maybe what the funding is for like getting
To
sandwich
convene-
for everybody.
so that you can convene meetings with or without VHCV there to support you, so that you can have conversation. What we've heard some feedback is like, this is working for TAC members, but as Zach said earlier, if you're sitting outside the circle, you've got less ability to participate. Regional listening sessions are a way for a lot of people show up at those, but not everybody will access. So we wanted to give groups who are really interested in convening folks some funding and some support to convene and provide feedback. So we don't need WUV to do this, but we would hope that WUV would think about other partners that maybe you want to work with to do this. We'll also help you if you need help putting these together. We want to get this, we've got some funding, we want to get it out the door, and we want to get some feedback back with that without us facilitating the whole conversation.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry, I just had the.
It's fine.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah. It was just, yeah.
Yeah.
If we knew 12 to 15 groups right now, and we were like, oh, the 12 to 15 groups are already identified, we're going to just give them each $4,000. That would be simpler, but it's
Quick time, like it's a pretty quick time frame. If like the expectation is like the grants are due mid-January, but you need to host these meetings by March.
to March.
End of March.
So, yeah,
It's just quick.
It is.
I think as Isaac said, and it's explained, I know we just handed you a bunch of information. There's a lot to digest in there, but the intent is that we will be developing a facilitator's packet of information. Basically, that kind of helps if your group applies for a grant and receives an award. There will be hand-holding from us to kind of help provide meeting materials, background information, and some clear guidance on the structure for the kind of feedback that we want. And when we're developing that material, that's exactly the material we plan on bringing to the regional listening sessions. So it will, our hope is that we're kind of developing this information packet that can be used by stakeholder groups, but also by kind of our team as we host this next round of listening sessions, that provides the background information people need, helps kind of solicit the type of input that we really want to hear from communities at this point, but isn't duplicating that effort across all these groups.
And I think there's about 20 yes or no or fact questions in here, and then about 3 places where we'd like you to write 2 to 3 sentences. So that's what this interest form is. If you look at it, it's hopefully pretty straightforward. If you have suggestions on how to make the interest form even tighter, we'd take those, but we're hoping to post this and so that people can think about it over the holidays and then talk to us in early January and put something together. And then if we have 50,000 applications for this, we're going to probably go back to people and say, hey, like Chris, you and A. Johnson both put one in to put, forest products people together. Would you like to do this together? So we'll do a little of that matchmaking if we need to. Jamie?
And Trey, so will the results of these meetings sort of be packaged into a set of then an overview, recommendations that then will be shared with us, we can digest through the
Yes.
portal or something like that?
Yeah. The idea is that after the regional listening sessions and after these, we'll be crunching all that and presenting it to you, giving you access to all of the raw data, and then coming together to talk about what we learned so that we can finalize, move forward towards a final draft of this set of recommendations. So that's like between now and the end of March, we're gathering a lot of data. And so we will be a little bit prescriptive of like, what kind of answers do we want back? So that we can pull it together. You know what I mean? Like there's gonna be a lot of data incoming, and we don't want it to just go out into the void. We want it to be focused towards conversation.
Coming out of the last set of regional listening sessions, there was a lot of feedback from this group, and I think kind of feelings of all these different ways that we could do the next round better. I'm curious, can you just talk us through a little bit of your process from getting from there to here, where we have these sort of 2 pathways of input?
Yeah, I mean, I think our feeling was that we wanted there to be as many ways for people to engage as possible, and allowing stakeholder groups to gather themselves felt like a really good way to bring more people into the discussion and sort of broaden the number of people who are engaging versus just a regional meeting in one place. I think that, as Annie mentioned, we are going to be developing materials over the coming month to provide to these groups of people who sign up to do these sessions. That material will be used for the regional listening sessions. And so at this point, I would just separate feedback from the last regional listening session from this to some degree. I think we would also like to improve on the regional listening sessions themselves. Not just do this as an additional means of getting feedback. Trey, I don't know.
Yeah, one of the pieces of feedback from the regional listening sessions was just about how to have less talking heads time and more talking time for the people who participate. So you were thinking about a different facilitation model for those. They're roughly the same time. We're taking roughly the same approach of going to 5 different places, working with RPCs to invite people broadly to come to those, conservation commissions, districts, trusts, et cetera, community orgs. See, once you start listing, you have to keep going. But getting the word out in the regions that this is available. But then when people show up, I think we want to have, we thought that like the show and tell part of it went really well. Like before the formal program started, people got to walk around and ask questions. So we want to do that again. But then we had like an hour of talking at you that we're going to change for the upcoming one so that there's more small group chances for people to engage and talk and then share out.
Is it possible to have these meetings later in the evening or in the evening? Just because my faction is at a huge disadvantage on these daytime meetings, being working lands. This
We have them we have them scheduled 4 to 7, but with the formal part starting at 5. But for us, it's also a travel home from 2 to 3 hours away some places. So it's like, how do you do it late enough that people can get there? But
And we do have people asking for them earlier in the day because later is hard. It's been hard to kind of strike that balance, but totally hear that comment. And
we'll do one virtual session at the end as well for people who can't get there physically. And we have one in Montpelier, later in the process as well. So for people who are, want to come to one that's sort of more centralized.
Shelby,
go ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry if I missed this before, but so what I heard is the January 22nd meeting, VHCB will be coming with some draft actions. I'm kind of wondering if folks are interested in feeding into action development. Where are our efforts best targeted in the timeline? I mean, January 22nd is pretty soon in the calendar, but like, is there openness to VHCB for integrating draft ideas even within the next month? Or would it be better to react to what you bring forward? Or both? Again, I think that you did address this, but I'm just trying to get like a really clear sense of where the homework is best done.
Yes, and I do love to think of it as homework, because then I could be 7th grade teacher again. And this is the best kind of homework because it's like choose your own adventure. So what we asked so Shelby, great question. We want people to, I'm happy for you to let us know between now and January 19th if you have substantive ideas how to feed into this framework with specific actions. We're hoping to collect those through that meeting though, and at that meeting to hear ideas and talk about them. But we won't turn around. We're not going to, between January 22nd and a regional listening session on February 2nd, we won't assimilate all that. So TAC is an initial sounding board of feedback and ideas. We probably can make some overall adjustments in how we present things based on that discussion with you all, but we'll be gathering input from you all, from regional listening session participants, from this grant program of input. And that's what we'll be pulling together and working on with TAC towards the end of this process. It's like, how do we assimilate all that feedback into the next iteration of the plan? We lost the screen again.
They're probably still there. They were last time.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So can you just say again what the 22nd looks like? January 22nd?
Yeah, we're hoping 10 days before January 22nd to send you a packet with a fleshed out framework. And we're going to build that agenda around a central, the central item on the agenda on 122 is going to be reactions to what we've shared with you, as well as your ideas that you don't see incorporated that you've brought forward. It probably is, if you've already begun this, or if you have some time and interest to think about this between now and then, we would be interested in seeing people's co-creative ideas. And you can wait till you see something from us and say, here's what I think is missing. So it's like, depending on capacity and time, I think you could do either or both of those things. I know I've heard from some people who said, hey, we've already started thinking about this, and what kinds of actions. And probably many of you, as we sit here today, are thinking about those too. So we definitely welcome those, Shelby. All right. I'm going to see if anybody has any last questions about timeline. And then if none, Shelby, do you still have a hand up? Okay. All right. All right. So let's shift gears, and we're going to get up and stretch and grab food and then talk and, use the loo and everything. But I'm going to do another round of inviting our guests to share. So no more prefatory remarks this time. Is there anybody, Monica, I had asked you earlier if you could hold an idea that you had. Do you want to share now?
Sure, thank you. And sorry, I was a little unclear in the process earlier. I do have just a couple things. First, thank you for inviting the public to this meeting. I really appreciate being able to be here. So thank you for that. And thank you for also sharing that timeline with the future public meetings. I guess I will share that I'm partly here today because I really wasn't sure if or when or how the process for providing public comment would unfold. I encourage you to get that up sooner rather than later, because I think there are people like me who are just unclear what that process might look like. But what I wanted to share earlier is that when I look at the draft pathways and actions and the template that you've provided, one of the things that occurs to me that I'm a little maybe fearful of in terms of the overall plan is a problem that I've seen with a lot of strategic plans, where if they're too focused on the actions and the pathways, then sometimes we can miss the big picture. And in moving conservation forward, one of my biggest questions is, how do we address this all together as one unit? How do all of these tie together? Will there be a process for an ongoing coordinator to continue the efforts? Is that going to be VHCB's job? Is that going to be placed within ANR's job? But I think that this is probably comical in the context, but I would almost say the easy job is putting together a list of actions. The hard part is providing a framework under which all of the little organizations, all of the bigger agencies, all of the bigger organizations can actually work together. And I just want to encourage you with these pathways and actions to not miss the bigger picture of the structure that will allow us to actually implement the actions in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Anybody else who has something they want to share before go ahead, Mike.
I just want to say that.
Ray, could speakers introduce themselves?
Oh yeah, Mike, will you introduce yourself?
Mike Covey, Executive Director. I had some concerns about the initial document, which I'm sure you all read, and I'm seeing those concerns continue today. I'm seeing a lot of circular discussion. I'm seeing a lot of flowery language that doesn't really get to the point of what is going to happen. And I'm seeing an entire focus on how do we implement this. And I haven't heard anybody ask the most important question of what are the negative impacts of implementing this going to be to landowners and to the average Vermont citizen. And if you're not asking that question, you're missing the most important part of the conversation you're having. That question should be asked about every single pathway you consider. I I had a comment that I was gonna make that I think is unnecessary, about how I feel about it, but I think that coalesces where I'm at on this. I'm not seeing any meaningful questions about what the impacts are gonna be to people. All I am seeing is how do we get this done? And not a great deal of emotion on that.
Thanks, Mike. Go ahead, Claire.
Claire Ireland, I'm with the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts. I guess I first want to just thank you for all the work that's gone into this process so far. I do think the template is going to provide a lot of clarity and really get down to the nitty gritty level that we really need to start digging in on about what is actionable under this plan. I know it's going to take a lot of work. I anticipate a lot of writing in my near future, and the devil will be in the details. I do want to offer, before I dig in just a little bit on some specifics of the form itself, I want to offer that at the end of this process, after we develop this template out for every pathway, that we do an analysis at the end where we cut the data different ways, where we're looking at all of the entities that are named under this plan and then list where they're named at. Maybe code the data, maybe say, this is a data collection data point, this is a project development point, this is a project implementation point, and then we code the data that way. And just have a lot of different lenses to view this data through at the end, because I think this will ultimately be what, informs our priorities, our strategies, our funding, and who's involved, who's at the table, and really make that clear, and then any tools that get developed. So looking forward to some nitty-gritty data work. On that note, though, I just want to maybe say a point of caution on the metrics side of this, just echo some points that were already made. Metrics, a lot of this, the big picture of this effort seems very quantity over quality. Just in the inherent structure of 30 by 30, we're saying 30% of the land, 50% of the land in the later stage. That's a quantitative metric. We really do need to reincorporate the qualitative. And I think that these sub-action items are our opportunity to do that. So just really keeping that in mind as we develop out the metrics and being willing to adjust the metrics over time if they're not working, if they're leading us to a place that was unintended. I actually had a very similar point where I think it would be helpful on this form and as we go through each pathway to identify the potential negatives. I don't think we need to sugarcoat this. I think there are pros and cons for every single pathway and the potential for unintended consequences. So if those exist, and to the extent that they exist, I think it would be good to name them, and then also potentially offer potential mitigation strategies or flag for the state. If this happens, if we, by having more land in fee title ownership by nonprofits, if that's taking land out of municipalities' tax base, to the extent that that does, how do we mitigate that? How do we still fund our conservation commissions, our road work, et cetera, if there's less tax base? Or, if there's access to businesses, naming the potential downside and then a mitigation strategy. And then keeping in mind that we do have the opportunity to do this a different way. And I think that way is really trying to empower people from the ground up. So just keeping that in the back of our mind as we're going forward. And that at the end of the day, I think it would be good to come out. One of the outcomes might be a specific tool to connect this siloed work with all of the other siloed work that's happening in the state. And so maybe that's as simple as like a single form that just going through and checking the boxes and saying this parcel of land is a priority from Vermont conservation design, but also flood mitigation, but also land development, et cetera. It could be that simple, but at the end of the day, maybe that's one of the outcomes that functionally makes us connect this plan to other plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. It's great to have you here. Couple more minutes here. Does anybody else share? Zach, you often have a comment, and you're welcome.
Thank you. Anybody sitting here? I'm Zach Porter, Executive Director of Standing Trees, and a few things. One is I hate to be in between you and your lunch, so thanks for listening to a couple more minutes of thoughts here. I guess I want to flag a couple things and just respond to some of the things that were talked about a moment ago. The idea of stakeholders hosting groups is not new to this process. The phase 1 inventory had a stakeholder listening session idea or design that many people tried to make use of. It failed miserably for us. We hosted a group that was literally sabotaged by people who were not interested in, helping us collect the thoughts of our community. It was an open, Zoom meeting format, and I'm just, making you all aware that it was disastrous. And so I am worried about the idea of, and also for the reasons that Lynn articulated, it's a lot of work to potentially put something like that together and to put that on the folks here. I wonder if there are just, ways to have additional Zoom meetings to seek, more than one, to seek input during that same time frame. Asking people to devote 3 hours to a public meeting is, in my opinion, too long. You just can't get people to put that kind of time out of their daily lives into a public meeting. And, to the comments I think that were made here, making sure that there are some options to do it in the daytime and to do it in the evening time. To me, that's a better use and probably less expensive than having grants go out to a whole lot of organizations to hold their own meetings. That's just an idea. And based on the experience that we had, I wanted to, and just to make it clear that even though I've had concerns about some of the ways that input has been gathered up until now and some of these equity concerns, that was, I didn't want people to get the impression that that was my idea based on what you had said, Trey, to go that other route of having, because you mentioned my name as you were talking about other options for gathering input. Neither here nor there. Maybe I shouldn't have brought that up again. But real quick, the Adirondacks were mentioned earlier, and I had to do a double take for a second because I was confused about why they were being invoked here. A lot of the conversation today has been about maintaining our working landscape, quote unquote, a term I really struggle with because our whole landscape is working for us. And the purpose of the, Community Resilience and Biodiversity Protection Act is to focus on biodiversity and the ecologically functional landscape of Vermont. That is in the legislation. And the Adirondacks are, would make a very interesting case study in some respects. But it's also really important not to take the Adirondacks out of context, right? The Adirondacks are one part of a much larger state, a much larger region, and they're incredibly unique for what they offer and how they're managed. They do have pretty strong legal protection, stronger legal protection than any, just about any wild land in New England. And so if we take a look at, other states, the way they're doing things, I just hope that we put it in the proper context. There's so much more that could be said on the topic of the Adirondacks and so much more that we could learn from what's gone on over there. In terms of biodiversity protection, production of clean water, carbon storage, on down the list, the things that this legislation is really supposed to be about. I think I'll just stop there. So, one more thing, actually, to one of the other commenters' points, I think it would be really great to have a clear way to provide actions immediately. As soon as you can get that up online, a way that the public can send you what those actions should be, so that it's not just responding to a first draft when that comes out, but that hopefully it's feeding and getting that first draft to be as strong as it can be. Because that wasn't a specific request during previous comment periods. So I think that kind of like a scoping for what are the action steps that we could put into this draft document that went out now, then by later in January, you could have a good start to that list. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you. Respond to one thing real quick there. I'd love to talk to you more about the Adirondack point, really. But just want to totally clarify something. What I wanted to bring that up because of is to get into the idea of the negative consequences that have been brought up with people here. I wouldn't argue for a second that the Adirondacks were a smashing success by the metrics that you've discussed there. Also been an economic disaster for local communities. I am here because of that. That's where I'm from. That's where my family's from. Really never wanted to leave. I'm not also here to tell you that I'm not glad that those circumstances exist, because that's my favorite place on earth, and it is what it is because of the protection it has. But I think you have to acknowledge, and I really hope that this
process doesn't go on without acknowledging that there are real social costs to that. And there are, you know, like the destruction of the timber products industry has consequences. It has real like societal consequences. And that's what I mean when I say I really want us to use, you know, try to use the example of the Adirondacks to dodge some of the negatives that have come with the with that whole project. I also would say real quickly too, durability exists as long as the people want it to exist. And at the Adirondacks, the protections are strong. They're not that strong. You know, 2 consecutive legislatures can undo anything that you know, the APA's charter is at the whim of 2 consecutive legislatures. That's a few years of public sentiment. So if these projects are forever, which is the theory, that exists as long as the will of the people can support it. And that's why I don't think it's productive to leave the will of the people out of the conversation. Right, so that's my sort of
Thanks, Alex.
bottom line. We could go on about this, I'm sure.
Maybe not,
We should,
not today.
but not right now.
I think this is a
Lot to say.
good topic, like I said, maybe for a lunch conversation, but we can, if other people have ideas for those. I mean, you know, we can't emphasize enough that we do want to find ways to help us hear from you, right? So if the mini grants isn't your bag, you know, or if there's ways we can improve that, then please don't worry about it. There's other ways to engage with us. Members of the public, members of the TAC, bringing your ideas to January 22nd. I think it's unrealistic that we're going to do another whole version of this between January 22nd and February 2nd. So I heard your question about getting a lot of input now, but the process of pulling it together and editing it is this is a lot of hard work, and it takes a lot of, but so I don't think I can promise that even if you sent me stuff today, that we're going to be able to change what we're working on today. But engaging January 22nd, engaging in February and March, that's where we're going to be trying to assimilate those ideas and build this into something that we've all worked on together, as opposed to just a starting point that we'll offer you. And this frame, I think the objectives and pathways are pretty clear, and the template, we wanted you to have that. So we also welcome you to really dig in between now and then. So it is now actually, unless there's are there other TAC members who want to respond to any public comment today, either just now or earlier today? Because we want this interchange. So thank you to Zach and Alex for that. And anything else before we break? We're also going to, you know, grab our food and sit back down. I'm going to ask Gus to say a couple things to us, but then we can talk about whatever you want to until we break. And if anybody needs to get going, this has been a long meeting, to Zach's point. Members of the public or TAC members, if you need to take your sandwich and go, that's fine too. Final comments? All right, well, why don't we take, it's 12:23 right now. Why don't we take 7-8 minutes to stretch, use the loo, grab, oh, there is a tea. If you want hot tea, I can show you how to make it up here. I forgot to say that earlier. There's a little red lever for hot water. Grab some food and let's reassemble in 8 minutes.
I have to ask you, or I was just realizing yesterday you were in the office at your meeting. How has it been going back?
I mean, for me personally, okay, the kids are older. It's 45 minutes, but with only one traffic light, it's all needing to end. And
Actually, she's not there today.
No.
a point now where it's not so less. Probably in the office. Glad we have 1 day a week, feeling 1 day a week, home 2 days a week. Very good.
I know.
So it's good. It's fun. It's nice to see. There's a lot of good ideas. I've gotten sick. You know, from parents. So we talk about that a lot. And it's been a huge distraction. It's caused a lot of stress and anxiety for other staff, even now, which there's some resignation. People who are trying to keep your bus getting. With that anger.
Yes. Yeah, I hope so. This is a good holiday. Yeah. You guys,
If you're out, are you taking off?
I'm gonna visit my folks for a couple of days.
People.
He's taking a
What are
gap.
people I work with that feel-
Online. Yeah, I can have a virtual graduate. It's almost 20.
Yeah.
Which feels closer than it has. Joke, I usually like kind of biting and it's like, oh, shoot, like actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we're great.
That's the problem.
The will for the current, yep.
I always feel like I sound like I'm down on the whole thing when I
Yeah.
say things like that, but I really, what I need is. Yeah. There is no such thing. It is, you know, like New York feels, like it feels impossible that, you know, for the elected, like, right. I know. Well,
But I mean, I don't know, like all sorts of stuff happening right now. There's still some good stuff, you know?
Yeah, like Jimmy's got there, so
I'll be looking for you. We'll have a good next.
lunch yesterday there.
Like 2.5 weeks. I'm gonna be mostly off. Yeah, yeah. It's a 9-hour time difference, so it's very hard to be on anyway.
Plenty of.
So I'll be like monitoring a few things, but yeah, it's a good time to go to. Like when I went in September, like that's a terrible time to go away because like people are just
Okay.
summer, so it worked when I was there. But my husband had to work while I was there anyway, so it didn't matter. This time we have like a ton of family coming, so it'll be nice.
And this invested in family going. I mean, great excuse for,
Okay.
My husband has a 4-bedroom house
I don't know, maybe.
on the ocean. So my son's there right now. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law are there now. Another brother-in-law's coming. My daughter and I are headed Sunday. So yeah.
Donor agreements, was he hosted domestically before, or was he someone else international? Taking a lot of strides.
We're here.
Tapping and everything.
He was 6 months in training in DC. Yeah. Yeah. Both had like major career changes at the exact same time. As it happens. So yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be in India. That's more of a first posting. So his next posting will be probably much worse. Some aspect of hardship.
The trails would fall under their purview. They're part of the Vermont Trail System. Under the Vermont Trail System, build project that would disturb up to 10 acres of forest. That's 27 miles along a single track. It's basically we've requested past jurisdiction, and that is by asserting what the facts are versus asking like, here's the situation. So my understanding, and Act 50 can't apply across culture.
Napkin.
But even
And I was like, oh my God.
not enough.
I think that something about gut talking. Yeah.
Two paths.
I think there's one of them to get food.
Need an answer to the question. And the answer.
I have to leave it naturally.
Stop asking. Exactly. Or they're going to feel like.
I have to leave at one, classically.
Project appreciated. I think we're going back to that.
But, you know, that like
Navigator.
period of COVID where we're really good at like bouncing from meeting to meeting. It was just happy.
Yeah, it's like between things, yeah.
Thanks to you. How you doing? Granted holidays. Good.
That's it. So the I mean,
Are you?
yeah, I'd be more than happy to.
I
I remember like I think like
Sorry.
not a specific question, like a hey, Adam. But I'm more than happy to.
We can reconvene early in January, at least.
We act.
The 22nd. So that we were like,
Yeah.
had some
Very.
alignment, that would be really good.
Oh, but
It's happened like the first time, so like take time off and be home
and so
I mean, not even because of like work, like.
first said,
And I feel like it's-
Yeah.
I went back like the apps are great too.
Where they're present.
If something happened, it happened.
Nice to see you.
Right.
And yet again, if we want, if, yeah.
Okay.
Because I'm pretty.
How are you?
Like, and if there were,
You guys sit here, sit here. There's the empty seats. Yeah.
there are.
Yeah, there's seats. Yeah, you too.
Okay.
How you been?
Guys,
Wow.
think your place up on Megog closed down for the week?
Oh, yeah, it's like,
It's like,
yeah, and remember Magog, like where we are. It was like
That's a whole nother-
full there.
But I'm
Most of where we are.
in Arkansas.
you know, But there's,
So in like,
we'll see around that's just like,
I'm curious,
north, that north wind is,
Bills.
yeah, yeah, pretty rugged.
You would be finding. Well, hiking trails,
Has it been winter big time up where you are?
doesn't matter where they are.
The spine of the.
Reroute for construction.
Yeah, we don't have as much, in the valley, but yeah, it's been like a really great start to winter. Tomorrow sounds demoralizing, but hopefully it'll switch around
Very status.
fast.
Everything's totally.
I don't know, thaw there around Christmas. What about the map?
Like, thinking about what I should be getting at the big,
So like.
The only thing I've seen
Did, like,
about is the tier 3.
coming out of COVID, we had a major,
But
transition, but, last year we've been,
tier 1 can be that.
yeah, not a lot of time. A little bit.
Tier 3.
Hiring a job right now, but we just internal transition, so like. Moved around. So yeah, no, we're feeling more stable.
I've seen.
And that's really nice.
It's
So our watershed specialist job.
even like. How many did you get off here? That is great.
About right now.
And it may not have.
Six or eight.
level now, you're entry level.
Lower edge of mid.
It's actually a pretty good.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Process that they were doing.
Easy.
Good job following the.
A lot of discussion.
That map detail.
Drying up or with it.
I think probably some of that, yeah. It's so interesting, like our jobs that are
If you're gonna do it.
fairly natural resource. A lot of applicants, great applicants, we tend to retain those. It's kind of the jobs that people could do in a lot of different jobs. Our finance jobs,
We actually.
our IT, oh my God, they're so hard. It's so hard to keep people, it's so hard to attract good people and like, that's.
We lost my nail versus too.
And it's really hard.
What would you, what would?
Yeah, our finance office, like we finally have someone great, and now I'm trying not to kill her. And have her leave because she's catching up to her after so much transition. It's really hard. And we have another finance job we're hiring right now. Like, yeah, it's like a good applicant. It's been.
And so, anyway,
Just another
oh,
option.
if
That would be.
Not all of the pathways are supposed to serve.
Time equipment.
So we have enough pathways.
But minimally established on the work. In some ways, like it goes back to that there could be.
Some mobility, state.
Always tell you.
I know they're,
A little bit less from.
they've been very.
private sector. State to federal pathways.
How could be, they're actually.
Nice to have, they're always in.
And more private sector.
I've had planning for us.
Really.
Not touch and go, but like, okay, there's.
They'll be
For the sort of wood products industry, bring in the markets.
Ish.
Private sector this time.
I don't know. So much as, that has not been
They
explained.
were saying it's like Fed start.
Yeah, we're not sure.
I think it's.
And even then, I was like,
Schedules are.
you shouldn't be afraid of it. You should lean in.
We're all terrified of it.
Understood.
Activity is terrifying.
It has been. Places to be heard.
Where his.
Here?
Yeah, I wish it was, wish the lack of
Like the horse degrees
me
means
to an amazing job by leadership, but no.
Both trails, like,
I do think we're also coming off, like, coming out of COVID.
and they proceeded and they It worked with,
for everything.
yeah, and I think.
And I feel like maybe they're a little settling down now. It's also just like had a great meeting. So much other external like dialogue going. Can I have one thing stay? And maybe that's feeling that a little bit. I felt like, but also a couple years after COVID.
So like,
We did PLT at 20.
I'm happy with that.
COVID, so there was also like that disruption.
We can't like that up versus maybe.
Organization.
Like, no, we don't have to be afraid.
And after that, we had tail.
Well said, like.
Yeah, she gave me a little bit.
And again, you could just insert that in.
Yeah, it was, no, it was not.
We were looking at, we'll see what happens.
So yeah, opportunity.
But it's pretty bad.
What is it?
And that would only.
Great. Has everybody had a chance to grab some food?
Huh? Yep.
Why don't we sit back down for
Under that assumption.
25 more minutes and then we're gonna let you go.
Greg.
I'll double check, definitely check.
Higher. They're actually giving us money. Enforcement, federal, never done more. Good neighbor. Activity.
Yeah.
And
This makes sense.
I can like.
Where are we? Yoda, hang out in big city.
Yeah. Shelby, we're gonna get.
We're up to that.
How does that?
Shelby, good.
Anyway, cool. Yeah, no, that, and again, happy to get for details. Helpful.
And a little.
Love the revenue.
When you're one of the. A place called Pickled Pig. Well, this is
Zach, there's one more through here and one more out here. All right. So folks, team, we're gonna, Annie and I asked Gus if he would come and listen today. He couldn't join us right at the beginning, but listen and just kind of, as we have our lunch conversation today, just kick it off with a couple of remarks. We only have about 25 minutes before we want to let you go, but I hand it off to Gus and thank you. I'm also gonna, after Gus speaks, I'm gonna disappear for a second with Helen and help her with something. And I'll be back at the very end. But if I don't see you before you leave, have a happy holiday. Really enjoy working with all of you and thanks for today. But yeah, Gus, go ahead.
Well, good afternoon, and sorry I had to miss about the first hour of this today. Just wanted to comment on a few things, and those of you who were here at the last meeting, I might be a little bit repetitive, which I apologize. For those of you who don't know me, I've been at the Housing and Conservation Board since the board began back in the late 80s and helped write the statute when I was still at Community Action that created the board. Act 59 is different from the CB. I want to acknowledge that up front. It asks us to do something different tomorrow, but I think we were asked to do it for a whole bunch of reasons, and it includes the "and" in our name. And I think it goes fundamentally to some of the discussion we've had about equity and inclusion today. And really, when I reflect back on learning how to do my job, the very first thing that Molly Beatty, who is one of our original board members, said to me that I needed to think about was, when we did conservation work, was will the public love it or not? And so all the values that are reflected around this table, I think really get back to, do we have the will of the people to support the work that we'd all like to do together? And that we think is critical wherever you get onto this train of change in terms of how we look at our landscape and utilize it and protect it. Whether that has to do with intensive use of the landscape or biodiversity and resilience. And I think I agree with the notion that the landscape is always working on our behalf. Really rich discussion today, and it reminded me of the early days when we were actually writing the Housing and Conservation Board statute and trying to write a statute in which people could see themselves reflected in it. And that some of the difficulty we had in pulling a coalition together. And I guess I just would say to all of you that the Council on Rural Development did a public opinion survey maybe 15 years ago, and the number one value that Vermonters identified was the working landscape, with 97% in support of it. But of course, when you have a number that large, that means lots of different things and lots of different values to different people. But even if that were to have dropped by 20 points, only 77% of Vermonters find the working landscape to be their number one value. It still reflects an overwhelming desire of Vermonters to live here for a whole set of reasons that have to do with that landscape. And so for me, the idea that we need to value it, cherish it, protect it is pretty central. A good friend of mine said to me many years ago, once land's conserved, we have from now till eternity to argue about its best uses. And I think sometimes we all get hung up in a particular moment about what's our most important value around the working landscape. I do think, as somebody who's been doing this a long time, one of the things we failed at about 8 or 10 years ago was legislation that would smooth the way to easement amendments. My friend Darby Bradley once said that easements were the nuclear waste of the land trust movement. They last forever, and we don't always anticipate well what changes humanity will need in the future. And we may need, in writing this report, to recognize that, as a bunch of you have said today, we need to recognize, always see the future. I want to say that this process has been a good one for us. There have already been a bunch of practices we've made, changes we've made to practices of longstanding. There are new conservation and stewardship partners that we're supporting in terms of our capacity funding. So the process has already been one that has, from my perspective, produced change and produced new partners and produced new activity. And whether that's some of the work we've done with Cold Hollow to Canada, or actually a very exciting project we just did with the Stowe Land Trust that is soon to close, that will actually turn 8 vacation homes into year-round homes while conserving 150 acres. There's been good things coming out of this process from my perspective. We want everybody's hopes and dreams to be realized in this report, and for everybody around this table to somehow see themselves in it. And I guess I would just say the fundamentals of the work that we've done up to now has always been willing buyer, a willing seller. This is not a process that will compel people. Certainly, I think in the scope, a lot has changed since Act, including Act 181, including that we have less federal resources than we anticipated. I also need to say to you that over the last years, we have developed more state resources to work with to do conservation work. I absolutely hear all the voices about quality. I think that the evolution of the work we've done over time is one that has reflected increased quality in our conservation outcomes, whether that's been around water quality or it's been around issues of inclusion or many other aspects of quality. So I think all those things are really of value. I need to say to those who want specificity in this report, I've never seen more than a single or a handful of legislators read a report that was 100 pages or longer. That doesn't mean we shouldn't produce a report with lots of, it has lots of detail, but I think as a shorter span of attention, lawmakers have pretty short. Need to think about how do we write a document that's going to encompass some pretty broad stuff. That's and where is the role? And a question I always ask when I interview people is, what's your tolerance for ambiguity? Not everything that we're thinking about today will be the answer tomorrow. But if we write the right kind of document, there can be enough creativity in the lines we write that'll allow us to have new dreams and perhaps new ideas about how to pursue the dreams we've all had for a long period of time. So I don't know exactly what that right balance is. And I absolutely agree, we need to be very specific about some things and some values, but we may not be able to, in an executive summary, write everything that we need to write and still meet the needs of people who have really short spans of attention. And that's not to be critical of lawmakers. If you sat in the state's General Assembly and you have 1,000 different issues coming at you and 4,000 constituents, or if you're a senator, more than 10,000 constituents coming at you, it's a lot that people have to absorb. There'll be a few champions that will be interested in all the details, but we really need to think, I think, strategically in order to achieve our goals. And then I think the last thing I just want to say is that there's much more power in unity than there's going to be in something that is really fractured and fragmented. And so I know that we don't all agree on every issue, and we're not going to change that through this process, but I hope we can build a big enough platform that whether you are here because biodiversity is really valuable, not just on its own, but to human health, that you see yourself. If you love recreation and you want more access to the outdoors, or you want more equity in how land is owned, I hope we're going to see yourself in this report. Whether you're focused on food security, and it wasn't very long ago in Vermont that people were afraid to go to the supermarket. Maybe it's feeling like distant memory, but lots of us went to our local farmers to pick up food when we didn't want to be in supermarkets a few years back. That we need to reflect that as well as a part of what I think of as community resilience. For some people, that may mean changing the numbers in terms of the goals and having a little bit higher numbers, because there's been great controversy about how we count agricultural acres. I think we also are going to need to look at issues like how do we work with private landowners, because there's a limited appetite at this moment. And I think that'll be true for the next few years in terms of public ownership. And one of the things we've developed in recent years as a result of this process has been a program to support. This came after a meeting I had at Coverts. How do we support landowners who want to donate easements but can't afford the transaction? So you've already had a big impact on the work we're doing. I'm sure as these discussions go forward, there's going to be more impact that you're going to have. And I think there's a way to thread the needle to write a very inclusive report that holds up principles of inclusion, and holds up principles of equity, and holds up principle and the need for biodiversity, recreation, and working lands in all of the aspects that Vermonters love the landscape. So I really appreciate all the time people have been putting into this. And I hope what you've seen in the last several meetings of the TAC is a change that I think many of you asked us for in order to make sure voices are being heard more effectively. And with that, I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you very much, Gus. Really, really glad to have you here with us to close out our meeting today. And thank you for your words. We have 10 minutes left together. I think we've all talked a lot and heard a lot and digested literally a lot. So everyone feel free to stay until 1 o'clock. We can keep chatting. If there's anything burning that anyone does want to continue talking about, we certainly can do so, or we can kind of wind down as a group and make our way. I know this is a big chunk of time. Thank you all for making it a priority. Really great to be in a room together. And for those who join on Zoom, thank you for making that time as well. And we'll be together again on January 22nd. We'll send out more information about that. Reach out to us with anything, questions, comments in the meantime. We're here for you to chat with. So thank you all.
Cindy.